speaker is actually Mark Bailey, who's the Minister for Transport and so many other things in Queensland. And unfortunately, even though he was going to be joining us live, he had a bit of an issue he had to go and deal with. So we have actually pre-recorded something with him earlier this week to run today. And because many of you were good enough to submit some questions and some priorities as part of your registration, we have attempted to ask him questions from you from that early registration. So here we go now with Mark Bailey.
Well, it's my very great pleasure now to introduce the Queensland Minister for Transport and so many other things, the fabulous Mark Bailey, who's been such a tremendous supporter of the industry and an innovator. And we all know that if there's one thing COVID's taught us, agility and the capacity to innovate are critical to all of our futures. So, Minister, thank you so much for joining us today.
Great to join you, Margie, and your audience.
Thank you so much. Look, I think, everybody would agree that public transport is always a critical part of any government strategy, and it's a critical part of the engagement with consumers, voters, whatever you want to call it. But it's even more important now, isn't it, because of the implications of COVID and the impact that's going to have on industry. Could I get you to talk a little bit about the challenges that are now facing the public transport sector and governments delivering public transport in a COVID world and a post-COVID world?
Yeah, look, it certainly is a challenge. Obviously people are looking at the situation and prioritising their health and being very, very cautious about it, and that's understandable. We saw public transport patronage drop to as low as 80% during that initial period. And it's as we've come through it a bit and as we've done relatively well, I think we're the best performing state so far in terms of the health situation. We've seen people return, but not quite to the levels where we were. It's about 45% of patronage is there, so we've still got a long way to go. And so, people have really changed how they move around. And of course, sadly, some people aren't moving around at all, and they may be their jobs may not be there. They might be working from home. Their uni courses might be at home. So we've seen more people not moving as much. We've seen some people shift to cars just to, there's been a bit more capacity there. And we've also made sure that we did a whole range of things in public transport. So, we increased our cleaning regimes and our hygiene regimes. We've had campaigns to let people know how they can, behave appropriately and protect themselves. Of course, we've kept the whole full timetable on to allow people the maximum chance to socially distance. In fact, we added more than 1,000 services last week on the shoulders, just to give people that extra confidence, that extra capacity to have that bit of distancing in a context where our public transport system is the safest in the country, I believe, because we've had, it's been nearly a month since we've had any community transmission in Queensland. So the risk is, in fact, low. But, of course, everyone's being super cautious. And of course, that's understandable until we really come through this whole crisis. People will continue to be cautious.
And hugely appropriate too. I mean, I do think that return of confidence out of caution is going to be one of the big challenges for public transport operators, government and private sector. How do you see that process of getting people to feel quite as confident as they did before, and getting those patronage levels back up?
Look, I think it's a gradual process and people will make their own decisions as things unfold and continue. I think the longer, of course, we can keep performing really well, the confidence will gradually come back. There'll be other dynamics that may come into play. We're introducing hand sanitizer in high volume stations and others as well, just to give people that extra bit of assurance, to give them the option in case they've gotten their own, to just show that we're doing everything we can to support passengers and commuters in every possible way that we can. Our staff have been magnificent. They've been there all the way through, supporting passengers, giving them the right advice, giving them that assurance. And we'll continue to do that. And we find that in all our research, our customer feedback has actually been more positive than it was even beforehand. It was pretty high beforehand. Actually, it's increased since COVID, because our staff have been out there looking out for people. And I think people really can see that and acknowledge that.
Well, look, I certainly hope, and I'm sure everybody else does too, that Queensland stays in the health situation it is in at the moment, which is really tremendous. But given that with the best will in the world, there's always a chance that that's, could change. Wouldn't want it to happen. But, it's that uncertainty process and the ups and downs of having to manage such an enormous transport system with the prospect of no real certainty going forward. What sort of challenges is that presenting? How are you addressing that at the moment?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think the whole year has been many things. One thing is it's been an assault on the certainty, and being able to continue to deliver on the health front. We know that there's the risk is always there, no matter how effective you are. It is a very potent and easy to transmit virus. So we've all got to keep being part of this all the way, and that's part of our messaging. If you're feeling a little bit ill, just don't go to work and get tested. It's just so much better for you and for everybody else. And Queenslanders, I think, have really understood this very well. We've given advice. We were the first state to declare a health emergency in January, and we've been resolute about that. And hasn't always been popular. It's been a new dynamic, and took a little while for things to, people work it out. And at first, some of the criticism was whether we were being too harsh, but we were very clear about that. And I think people understand now why we've been so hardline and why we've been so clear. And there's an element of trust there, which is great to see. But, I just put it out to all our Queenslanders out there who are listening to health advice and every day doing, great things to socially distance by doing the enhanced hand hygiene, looking out for the vulnerable. There's been a lot of positives amidst the obvious difficulties in this pandemic. And it's brought people closer together, and I think that's a really positive thing. We see that on our public transport system, but we see that right across the spectrum, and I think that's really heartening.
I mean, I think one of the great challenges for government now is going forward, how do you manage for the risk as opposed to the emergency? And that, I think, is probably the next challenging stage as governments come to grips with the next mode of managing this exercise and perhaps working even more closely with the business community. Do you see a stronger engagement with the business community in terms of how you might plan what happens with the public transport system going forward, given the huge changes in workplace and so forth?
Yeah, look, we've really sought to work with the business community very closely throughout this pandemic. And in transport, that's meant having regular telecoms with the industry, with freight industry, with transport providers, with all kinds of people in our transport economy, so that we can share information quickly and transparently. So we know, everyone knows what page we're on. They've got access to me and the latest data and information. We've got a lot of relief packages in there, whether it's people that rent relief in our marina operations, or personalised transport, regional bus, regional aviation. We've had support packages as part of our economic plan, and we'll continue to do that. We want, when we get to the end of this, we still want the architecture and the infrastructure there to get through this and survive, so that we can rebuild and get the momentum going again. And that's meant supporting business and working with business about solutions, being pragmatic about it. And, I think we've done that pretty well. And, getting that intel of what's going on the ground in all of our different transport sectors has been important for us to tailor our responses. And, of course, we can't do everything for everybody, but I think we work pretty well with the business sector, and that's part of our economic plan going forward.
And, not to add extra pressure to the mix, but clearly the building of major infrastructure and continuing with a whole range of infrastructure projects, ramping them up, is going to be critical to economic recovery across the board. So, transport will almost play a quite disproportionately large role in that space. I mean, from your point of view, where do you see things like Cross River Rail going, potentially stage 4 of the light rail on the Gold Coast? These sorts of projects which are, I think not only will get the economy spinning, but also add a little confidence, because people go, oh, look at that, it's coming out of the ground. Isn't that super?
Oh, absolutely. Look, the very strong health response has been the best economic response as well. They're one and the same thing. And I think when you look at Victoria at the moment with the second wave down there, a lot of their construction's down to 25%. there's a lot less going on. Fortunately, you know, in Queensland, with our construction of transport infrastructure has actually accelerated with the drop in traffic volumes. We found on many projects we're actually getting the work done even faster with COVID-safe, you know, things in place, of course, in the workrooms and the lunchrooms. Those things were very taken care of early on. But we've also got $1 billion worth of road stimulus in there in the last 4 months as well, which we will be able to get out the door by the some of it will be out of the door by the end of this year and over the next 18 months. And this is a time where every income is going to be really important to, you know, provoke more, circulation in our economy, more jobs. And so there's a nice spread right across Queensland of that $1 billion worth of road stimulus so that everybody gets a slice of the pie, and there'll be tourism benefits there as well. But of course, you know, like we just announced the business case for Light Rail Stage 4 on the Gold Coast last week with the Premier. That's very exciting. It'll take the light rail from Burleigh, which will be complete in 2023. We're underway with early works now in the fully funded package from Broadbeach to Burleigh. And then it's a case of then taking it to the Coolangatta via the airport and completing that whole spine from the border right the way up the heavy rail system. And it's really transformed the Gold Coast. And you know, people love it. The tourists absolutely love it too. It's become part of the Gold Coast experience. And, you know, we've been able to get one stage done under the Palaszczuk government, another stage underway, and we're getting the business case done so we can, you know, smoothly move on to stage 4 after that. So, you know, infrastructure, absolutely essential part of our economic plan for recovery. Some sectors have really suffered, but fortunately construction is an area that has suffered the least. And because we're in a good health situation in Queensland, we're getting on with getting that infrastructure built.
Mm. Well, just on the tourism front too, I should tell you we did some phone tracking during the school holidays across the country to see what people were actually doing. Yeah, people were getting in their cars and nobody's driving more than 4 hours from a capital city, and happily it's 2 to 4 hours. So it'll give you a bit of an idea of what's going to be happening on our roads for quite some time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, you know, one of the upsides, we don't have international tourists, but we have a captured domestic state-based tourist market, and people are responding. You know, I have plenty of my friends are probably having more weekends off now to sort of, you know, contribute and to get out there and support our accommodation providers and our operators. And I think that's a really positive thing. And the bookings have been pretty healthy over the last couple of months. And, you know, it's an unusual situation, but we're making the most of it. And look, if you're going to be stuck in one state, Queensland's probably the best state to be stuck in when it comes to tourism. I mean, the diversity of experiences in our state is just phenomenal. And everyone's dusted off their Queensland bucket list because, you know, it's like, right, well, these plans might be out the window, but I think they're going to really enjoy and relish, you know, these holidays closer to home that they kind of meant to do and never got around to. Well, this is the time that they're going to get done, and that'll create a bit of a buzz too. So, you know, there's some positives there too.
Fingers crossed.
Absolutely.
So, look, I wouldn't mind just moving on to some questions that some of our attendees have submitted when they registered. So there's some things that our guests are interested in, and I might just flash a couple of these past you. Even though we're in the midst of COVID, life is complicated, but as you rightly pointed out, you're getting on with business. Just talk to me a little bit about energy transitions, because you know, this whole issue around new and more sustainable energy product in the transport space is really critical, and I wonder whether that's part of the return of confidence to people feeling like it's a green transport service.
Yeah, look, you know, there's a huge energy transition going on worldwide, not just in large-scale generation, but also in the automotive sector. We're a big supporter in Queensland of that energy transition. We've got to move on from combustion engine vehicles onto zero or low emission vehicles if we want to act on climate change. It would be nice to see more leadership from a federal level on this, because there really has been very little, but some of the states have led the way, like Queensland and Victoria have done some really good work in this. And of course, the rest of the world, a lot of, you know, Europe and the US are a long way ahead of us on this. So, you know, we're going to get more and more tourists every year who come here and expect to be able to, you know, rent an electric vehicle, not, you know, use an old technology combustion engine vehicle and travel widely with it. So that's why we put in the electric vehicle superhighway a couple of years ago, longest one in the world in one state, and we're putting another $2.5 million to include more sites and faster charges because we want that range anxiety issue up the coast dealt with, and of course you can go into inland to Toowoomba as well, as a bit of a an establishment thing and a baseline, and to facilitate people to buying them and renting them. And that's been very successful, and we're seeing the interesting thing about the pandemic, of course, is that predictably car sales have plunged significantly, but electric vehicle sales have actually held up very well. So there is certainly something going on in that market, and I think as the price point continues to come down, once it gets in the ballpark, I don't think it even needs to get to parity. Once it gets in the ballpark of parity, I think we're going to see a big transition into the new technology, and that will be a really good thing because it's easier on our environment, a lot cheaper to run these vehicles than paying for fuel all the time, and so much better in terms of acting on climate change. And as a big state that's has the most cyclones that affects the most people, it's in our own interest in Queensland to be part of the solution when it comes to acting on climate change. And, when people come here from Europe and Asia, and they should have the same access to that latest technology as anywhere else in the world.
Absolutely. So talking about everywhere and anywhere else in the world, the 2032 Olympic bid. Mm-hmm. I can only imagine all of this lovely infrastructure and all these projects would necessarily enhance that bid. But where do you see that? It's a bit of, polish up that crystal ball. We don't quite know what's going to happen now. Well,
look, we don't. I think the issue there has been deferred for a bit. There's been more immediate issues at hand, but certainly not off the agenda. I think the Premier's made it clear that it's not off the agenda. We're still interested. We have to see what happens with the Olympic movement, because obviously the 2020 Olympics won't happen this year, and there might need to be some adjustments, of course, to keep them going maybe in a different year, and whether that's viable and possible. But look, there's a great opportunity here to fast track a whole lot of infrastructure for Queensland, given that we are the growth state in the nation, to try and get more infrastructure and jobs coming earlier to us. If we can get a viable bid going with full federal government support, it would be phenomenal. And I think it's at a time where Queensland's matured enough to be absolutely able to handle it. I think 20 years ago, I think it would have been premature, but I think the Commonwealth Games, on the Gold Coast showed a high degree of professionalism and skill to be able to put on a really big event. And I think that's been the stepping stone to us potentially being a successful bidder for the Olympics. But look, the pandemic and the health response absolutely takes precedence in the short term.
Absolutely. Well, look, we're almost out of time, but I did want to ask you one last question that's a little more personal. For you, what's the sort of great personal legacy learning out of what's been an incredibly difficult time for everybody, but very particularly for the people who have to lead the state, lead the nation, and make really tough decisions? So from your point of view, personal takeouts?
Look, I think you've got to deal with it. It teaches you to deal with what is, and there's got to be a level of acceptance of the situation. And once you're in that position, you're then able to respond to it. And I think of it as the upside down year, really, where a whole lot of givens or seemingly givens are absolutely turned on their head. And I'm very relieved that we're in the kind of space we're in from a health-wise, because those early briefings were really frightening in terms of what could have happened. And in some countries, that is what happened. So I'm mightily relieved that our response, and Queenslanders and Australians' response, has been very good, Victorian situation notwithstanding. By world standards, it's been, this has been one of the best countries in the world to be in. But look, it's meant a level of flexibility, pragmatism, and innovation has been necessary. And putting the health things aside, the challenges have been incredible, and it's fast-tracked a lot of innovation and change in a way that very few other things could. So there's no way so many people would have worked from home. But the fact that so many have, and actually in so many cases it's worked, has really changed the idea of work hugely. And there's already a lot of downsizing of, floor space and office space, and for those people who don't need to actually be at work. We've changed the public transport system. There's been cashless and rear door boarding and a whole lot of measures there. Active transport's had a massive boost worldwide, including here in Brisbane and Queensland, and I'm actually one of them. I cycle into work whenever I can. It's a fantastic way to start the day. I get about a 4.5K run in, which, gets your blood pumping for the day. And I take the long way home. It's fantastic kind of chill out, stress relief. And, and so there's some changes like that as well. And look, I actually think on a much bigger scale, this kind of thing has probably made some people's bigger plans, accelerated. Those plans of 5 years' time, 6 years' time, we'll move here or we'll move to the coast or whatever. I think for a lot of people, situations change so much that suddenly some big decisions might come much earlier. So they're only just starting to flow through. So I think there's a whole lot of things about a very fluid situation that are unfolding, which will be very interesting. So from a government point of view, I think it's about staying in touch with how fast moving it can be and what we need to do, not just in terms of the health response, but it's a whole fluid situation out there in the economy, the workplace, and how people collaborate and work together. That's very interesting, and there'll be a lot of real positives out of it.
Well, Minister, on that very positive note, obviously transport in good hands and many other things. Thank you very much for your time today. We really genuinely appreciate it. And good luck with the system going forward. And, fingers, toes and everything else crossed that Queensland stays in a happy situation in terms of the virus. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much, Margaret. Great to be here, and thanks to everyone listening as well.